Thank you very much, Peter, for your lovely introduction. And let me just start to share my screen. Can you see my, yeah, great, excellent. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me and for this lovely invitation. And it's my great pleasure to be able to talk about a topic that is really, really close to my heart. I have a long-term fascination about the concept of love and how does it situate within the Chinese context. So today's talk will be based on my ongoing research projects that is focusing on how love is incorporated within the state discourse, especially those propaganda materials. And I will be looking at how the new national hero role models has been constructed in these materials in order to tease out a particular Chinese way to love, possibly. So so you know, this is my work in progress. Therefore, any comments and feedback are welcome. And here we go. So to start with, and I would like to situate the love, what is love in the Chinese context, how love comes about and becomes a public discourse. One of my favorite books written by Professor Lin Pan, one of her books titled as When True Love Came to China, which she examined at the very beginning of 20th centuries, the Western concept of true love, which is mainly the kind of romantic idea of love, free choice and free free choice of your love partners, were imported to China. So at the beginning of 20th century. And at that time, China's new culturalist scholars critiqued its absence in the traditional arranged marriage. We all know that the traditional patriarchal family lineage emphasized on the parental control over their offsprings. Therefore, young people were not allowed to choose their marriage partners. It were all arranged by their parents. So within this kind of structure, the scholars at that time argued that love is not free or not equal. Therefore, we need to really modernize the way Chinese people do love in order to modernize the nation. So we saw a lot of this kind of debate going on at that time that imported the concept of romantic love and considered as the true love into Chinese public discourse. So at that time, the movement, well, the scholarly intellectual movement was trying to argue that we really need to abolish the traditional family norm based on this kind of patriarchal family arrangement to allow the free and equal love to flourish between men and women as an integral part of the modernizing the Chinese nation. But the discussion about romantic love and personal freedoms since the People's Republic established in 1949 gradually gave way to the revolutionary passions to build socialism and as well as a class struggle that was emphasized during the Cultural Revolution. So only this kind of topic of romantic love resurfaced since the marketization started in the 1980s. And romantic love suddenly flourished in popular public discourses again and as a hot topic. Since then, it can be seen as a sign of newly found personal freedom in China. And a lot of love stories were written by literary scholars, and love is everywhere in the television, on big screens, and were daily talked about in different kind of public discourses. And then if we fast move forward a little bit, in the 1990s, and then especially around the 2000s, alongside this kind of Confucian revivals of this kind of Sinophone classicism becomes fashionable again since marketization. The very concept of Western imported romantic love in some weird way or curiously has appeared to be reframed to be part of China's so-called traditional Chinese virtue. And that is embodied in the family practices. Today, based on my data and my research so far, and I think a lot of other scholars' writing has also confirmed this kind of representation of love, is that the correct and best way to love today, presented by the state, is to be found within the heterosexual marriage. That has become the embodiment of happiness itself. So my first book that is focused on the middle class family constructions and basically reflect this kind of idea of how a particular kind of family, a particular kind of marriage is represented to the public as something to aspire to. That is where the personal happiness can be found. And love and the nation. So what for this particular presentation, what I'm concerned about, how can we put this kind of seemingly personal topic of love related to the Chinese nation? And then I'm trying to answer these following three questions by looking into the new national role models that is basically presented to the public by the People's Daily, one of the main newspapers in China. So as I mentioned earlier, the data I presented here are drawn from two projects. One is from the project one is looking at the anti-COVID TV dramas since that is produced, endorsed by the state. Another one is this kind of database built by the People's Daily WeChat account, which every day, if you do use WeChat, you know that every day the People's Daily will send you newsfeed. Yeah. And then I collected these newsfeed, the top newsfeed from the early 2000 till this year, June. So I hope that this talk will be able to answer some of these questions listed here, especially how is the notion of love invoked in the state propaganda discourse, and what is deemed as lovable and who is lovable, and how it is related to the Chinese nation. So to make it clear, putting my personal interest in love aside, and I think here I want to use basically a speech given by President Xi Jinping to highlight the fact that love is indeed high on the Chinese agenda. As you can see here, that President Xi Jinping gave a talk at the celebration of the 100th anniversary of Chinese Communist Youth League. He made it ample clear that there is a hierarchy of love. And according to his opinion, the purest love is a love for China. And this is outcry from the bottom of the heart of Chinese youth living in our contemporary era. So here he made it very ample clear that yes, love is important, and the purest form is to relate your love to the Chinese nation. A little bit theoretical background. We all know, for those scholars who work on China, CCP has a long tradition of using emotional mobilization in its history in order to push its political agenda. And Christian Soros has also basically illustrated there is this kind of effective governance system that the state is trying to engineer the channels of the public expressions and traversing the distinction between the public and private, make the boundary become sort of dissolved and blurry. And my own work with my collaborator Zhou Yunyun in our paper based on the COVID-19 strategy about the hero presenting the TV drama produced by the state, we are trying to argue that the CCP has been trying to recasting a party as a humanized party by using the way they construct the everyday ordinary heroes, focusing on individuals. So the state media increasingly, we argue, that starting to take a humanistic and desire-centered approach, within which love for one's family becomes an essential vehicle to communicate its propaganda message. I think it's an important response the party states take to this transformation of Chinese society since the marketization. As we all know that individualization of Chinese society happened since the marketization, and therefore the market has stirred up the individualized desires and the focus on individual needs, and that we see that has been incorporated within the state discourse. So in the following slides, I'll be showing you several examples I found in my database. So from the People's Daily newspaper, there are several key tropes I will present. This is one of them, which is, I find it's fascinating. So it's basically the state is trying to pick up certain individual stories. Most of them are state workers. They can be police officers, or they could be army soldiers, or in different ways. They could be individuals working for the state in the public sectors, so on. So so the news often goes like, okay, the young couple, they are all both they're working very hard in the States. And for example, in this case, the young couple works for the state's anti-drug police forces. So they all dedicated to their work and they want to get married. They have been in love for a long time, but they have to postpone their wedding days because of their dedication, the task given by their work several times. But eventually the story goes, here we go, we celebrate their wedding, finally got married, and we think this is really deserved to be their choice of showing dedication to their work by postponing their wedding is such a glorious act by the couple. So you will see such stories reappears once every 1 or 2 months. You will see similar stories, and they always use this kind of the couple's wedding certificate photos as the title. for any of you who are familiar with Chinese, I don't know, marriage certificate, you all know that they always use this kind of red background, and then they dress in their sort of like formal uniform like this one, the police force. To, I would argue, it's signal the endorsement of the state. Yeah. And then therefore the model citizens' behavior and their private life, I would argue, is instrumentalized to invoke public romanticized emotional response. And through their dedication to their work, hopefully to evoke the public's dedication to the nation states, which makes the individual behavior lovable. So the outstanding performance and dedication to their work, that makes the conjugal love as its reward in the end. You know that they have done well in their work, therefore they deserve to have this happy wedding, happy marriage. So that is the story. Another interesting one is how often this kind of, when People's Liberation Army soldiers were featured, again we see this this kind of reappearance of romantic love becomes the way how stories are told. And this one is a typical example, in my view, that how I would say that the way that how this kind of sacrificial self is erected as an object of love, and by this kind of frontier soldier's love letter to his wife. If you can read Chinese, and if you can't, I can translate it for you. It's basically, the story goes that, okay, the soldier wrote a loving letter to his wife saying that, okay, I have to, it's not like I don't miss you, I don't want to spend my time with you, but I have to be physically separated from my loved ones and my family. And then he wrote a letter to his wife saying that if I die in a battle, I will leave you with my pension. If I'm disabled, I will leave our divorce certificate for you, so I won't become your burden. But if I come back, I will give the rest of my life to you. Yeah. So you see the waiting wife, a love letter from a heroic husband who is a PLA soldiers. These are all key ingredients for Chinese love stories. Yeah, to project the love's urgency and necessity through projecting a sacrificial self. It's not like it's not only he sacrificed himself for the state, but also he sacrificed his physical body for his love. In this case, his love for his wife. So I would argue that consequently, this kind of story summons emotional support for the nation state through romanticizing potential sacrifice for the nation. So, which is a very similar tactic used in the state TV dramas produced during the COVID-19 pandemic. Here you can see that one of the TV series we analyzed is the portrayal of female military doctors and cadres, and you can see in the same way the strategic disclosure of the party cadres and military doctors, their family life, has been instrumentalized to highlight the emotional sacrifice individual family need to make in order to contribute to answer to their higher calling and their love for the nation. So here you can see the two pictures. The female soldiers, she was first portrayed as a filial daughter to her own parents and a loving mother. So on the New Year's Eve, she returned to her family homes, and her both parents are quite old, and then her father just had a major medical surgery. But she had to tell them the bad news that she was sent to Wuhan. Yeah. So there was this kind of strategic disclosure. She loved her family so much. She doesn't want to leave them behind. She doesn't want to make them worry, but still she would be willingly sacrifice her small family for the sake of the bigger family. And then the second picture you see here on the screen is how her role has been transformed from this kind of private family, daughter and mother and wives, into this PLA soldiers. And that, I think this is a quite important sort of line of transformation, as those of you who are familiar with the Chinese literature, you might find similar tropes found in this kind of story, like, for example, women going to the battleground, like Hua Mulan, and how at the time of need, women were, women stand up and go to show their loyalty and piety to their family or for the state. And then for those of you who are familiar with this kind of trope, you will find this kind of storytelling convincing and emotionally appealing. Therefore, it's trying to create this kind of emotional resonance among the public. Another interesting example I found from the People's Daily newspaper is that how they're trying to immortalize a romantic conjugal love by using the story of this kind of long-term partners, couples who have been, for example, this example is a medical expert. Both of them worked in the Chinese university as doctors, and they are all very excelled in their own professions. And at the same time, most importantly, the story goes, it's not only about their dedication to their work, but also their love to one another. They spend all their life together. Their lifelong commitment to each other has been highlighted in this kind of story to, I would say, evoke the emotional response from the public by using the trope of buried in one grave. For those of you who know this kind of Chinese storytelling about the best love, the highest and purest love between couple, is there is a saying of, when you were alive, you share one duvet, but when you're dead, you want to be buried in one grave. So for those of you who are familiar with this kind of cultural background, when you read this kind of story, it is really hard to resist this kind of, oh, this is such a touching love story. At least that's how I felt when I first read it. But again, you will see that there's this kind of instrumentalization of romantic love and the love between the couple to try to shift the public attention and hopefully extend their love to the nation state that stood behind it. My final example would be, in my examination of these materials, we could also, in rare occasions, we all know that if you, in China, if you are a disabled person, your life is very hard. There are multiple structural barriers for you to enjoy a fulfilled life. However, in one of those rare occasions, these kind of disabled body were featured in these stories. I would argue, for example, this one is love become an inclusive strategy, but under certain conditions. So here we see a self-determined blind girl, and Zhang Chen, she will basically, the story goes, she conquered extraordinary difficulties with higher goals in mind. So she is able to study very hard and gain herself a degree. And most importantly, when she finished her degree, she vowed she wanted to return to her old school, dedicating her life to blind children's education in China. So her story were featured in the People's Daily, and importantly, and her story were told in a way by displaying her loving relationship with her partner and her husband. Yeah. So the display of her loving marriage, as you can see in those photos next to the slides, presented as a validation and reward of her lovable character. So overcoming her personal difficulties and her mission of helping others, and it presents the moment of her disabled body become included in the public eyes. Therefore, it becomes valuable and lovable in the nation state. And I think that's also a very interesting one, is how this kind of a different, the marginalized body, the momentarily were included in the state discourse. So how to love in the Chinese way? I might have already fast-tracked myself a little bit because I was conscious about time. But anyway, if we do have more time, maybe we can have more engaging discussion. So from those examples I quickly run through, and I think there are, I would feel comfortable to make the argument that there is definitely a quite standard way of to love in the Chinese state discourse. Yeah, and so in my view, love has become a discursive bonding strategy for responsive propaganda in the 21st centuries. When I say responsive propaganda, I mean that we increasingly see the states trying to connect to the popular desire for love and authenticity, individual identity, and aesthetic appeal of Sinophone classicism, which is the example that I did not got time to show you, which is increasingly we see this kind of reimagined, reproduced traditional cultural element were included into this kind of reconstruction of national role models and how to, in order to present coherent sort of Chinese history in this kind of storytelling. So the state is trying to respond to this kind of public longing for these individual desires and love, to try to enroll them into a nationalistic propaganda to increase its emotional responsiveness. And I think that is what makes me really interested in this topic, because we talk about propaganda, people often think, oh, these are the hardcore material nobody really believes in. But I think the power of propaganda these days, especially in the Chinese case, is it does try to incorporate these kind of private personal desires within it and give it grand narrative and assign meaning to it. So that is what personally I find fascinating. So consequently, we see that heteronormative model of conjugal love form the base to grow and extend one's affective loyalty and commitment from one's own family, small family, to different generations. Yeah, so you have to focus on this kind of romantic love. Do you remember at the beginning, the so-called free and the most beautiful love was based on two partners, men and women, freely choose to marry each other. So that's the base of this kind of love. And then because of the love, your love for another, therefore you will be able to love to one's parents. Yeah, so you see the intergenerational sort of love got extended in this way. And then later, if you remember the story I showed you, it's always when these couples dedicate themselves to love or other people beyond their family, and that makes their character lovable in this kind of state discourse. Therefore, I would say it's like this represent effective, extend one's affective loyalty beyond one's own family to the wider society, and eventually reach the imagined national community, the Chinese nation. And against the backdrop of a heterosexual conjugal family, I argue that love renders its magic power to present a historically coherent, yeah. And one of the examples I did not give is about how reimagined traditional Chinese culture are incorporated into this narrative to show the 5,000 years Chinese history has never been cut off, and we have carrying this legacy onward. And then it's historically coherent, but also socially harmonious Chinese nation states across space and time. But it's all based on this kind of heterosexual conjugal family. And then within these kind of national role models, and we see very clearly those characteristics that are promoted as lovable, and also different character individuals deemed as love-able are those who are able to show their commitment and dedication to the national family, to move beyond from their small family. Yeah. So especially when the national family is in the time of needs, be it the COVID-19 pandemic or when the Chinese border got challenged, and those moments of crisis, you see these kind of troops reappear to heighten the sacrifice individual made in order to contribute to defend or build to the bigger family of the nation. So one of the example, for example, the individual sacrifices, dedication is expected in love and in these kind of discourses for the benefit of the Chinese nation, and glorified in the state, and is glorified in this state discourse. And as one of the example I give you is about this kind of sacrificial self. Yeah. So I think it established a new love hierarchy, even though when the true love were first imported in China, and the critique were saying we need to make love free and equal. But then we see 100 years down the line, and a new hierarchy has been established that renders certain people more lovable and love-able than others. And the instrumentalization of romantic love, I would argue that is how the individual family and the national family is through this kind of instrumentalization of romantic love to form a full circle in order to prescribe a meaningful Chinese life. I would say in this way, the free, equal love, romantic love, also get finally nationalized in the state discourse. I think that's all I got so far. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would be very happy to answer any question here, any comments from you.